Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes on the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. So welcome wherever you're coming in. I realize we've got people overseas, we've got local people. So whatever time it is, welcome. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to send you an email at the end of this, which will have the slides and the recording, so you'll get a copy of those as well. And I've got a special offer at the end of this session as well. So I'm very proud to say my book is out, and I don't have a physical copy in front of me, but I've got one in the back office. So the whole bunch of books turned up, in a couple of days ago, which was very nice. So welcome. I'll share my screen. I've got a couple of slides I want to run through. And if you've got any questions or comments, what I suggest you do is just simply go to the chat box and put them into the comment box, and I'll get to see them and I'll respond to them immediately. And because we've only got 30 minutes, obviously I can't take 10 minutes at the end. So as soon as you've got a statement, a comment or a question, go for your life, type it in, I'll get to see it. So I'll just share my screen, and then we can launch into the presentation. Okay, so the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. Now, where do they come from? Well, my work across 21 industries and my own research determined that there were these 8 characteristics that, regardless of what the team is, whether it's in the world of sport, whether it's in business, you'll find that these 8 characteristics are commonplace, and I'm going to run through them with you in our brief session today. And, I think the key thing there is, I'm sure you'll be looking at this and thinking, well, how closely aligned is my team? I don't think it's a good idea to work on all 8, because obviously there's a lot of things to work on. So what you need to do is you need to pick one of those things and run with it. And I think that's the best way to go with that. So those of you who don't know me, I recognize a lot of names there, but many of you may not notice me. Tim Baker's my name. I'm a published author. In fact, Winning Teams is my 9th book, and I've got a 10th book coming out later this year. So I'm a pretty serious writer, as you can imagine, and thoroughly enjoy it. I'm also, of course, as you can see there, a keynote speaker and present across 13 countries at different times, and I present on a whole range of topics around leadership and performance. And just up in the top right-hand corner, I'm a mad keen rugby tragic. I'm still playing in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane, which is probably not a very smart idea, but really it's quite a social outing. We play every second week because it takes us 2 weeks to recover at our age. So there you go. So a little bit about me. Now, a little bit about the book. I've had the privilege of having a number of very elite sports people comment very favorably about my book, Winning Teams, and you can see a couple of those legends there. You've got Grant Fox of New Zealand, Tom Lawton, the Wallaby great, and Nick Farr-Jones, who I'll talk about a little bit further, and of course Katarina Carroll, who is the Commissioner of Queensland Police. So they've all written nice testimonials about my book, which is always a great thing. And Nick Farr-Jones had this to say about my book: Tim Baker's nailed the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. These characteristics are about relationships and culture rather than just the task at hand. So the 8 characteristics I'm going to talk about are very much around the whole idea of the people dimension of performance, and I'll get to that shortly. Now, of course, when you come into a webinar like this, you're probably thinking, well, I'm so busy working in the business. How can I possibly work on the business? I mean, where would I start? It's all too overwhelming. And then what obviously happens is that people don't work on the business rather than in the business. So what I'd say to you is this, that when I run through these 8 characteristics, what I'd like you to do is just to pick one of those characteristics and work at it. Because by working at one characteristic, what will happen is that the other characteristics will actually benefit from that. So I think that's the best strategy, rather than just trying to work on all 8 at once, which is really not practical, and it's not a useful, it's just too overwhelming to do that, as you can imagine. So what I want to cover briefly in our short time together is I want to talk obviously about these 8 characteristics. You know, what are they, for example, and I'll spend a bit of time on them. I don't have too many slides here, but I will go through the 8 characteristics with you. And as I go through those, I'll talk about some of the things that you can do, which are very practical. You could start doing them tomorrow, or not tomorrow, actually, it's Saturday, but next week, you could start on one of those characteristics and work on that. And at the end of this presentation, because you've taken the time to spend half an hour of your Friday with me, I have a special offer for you, which I'll share with you later in the presentation. Okay, so if you think about teams, and just for a moment, really there are 2 dimensions to teams. There's the task dimension, which is obviously the service or the product that you produce. And you wouldn't have a team if there wasn't a service or a product that you were producing. But on the other hand, you've also got relationships to build and to maintain. And often what happens is the leader of the team, because they're so busy, not because they don't see the benefit of it, because they're so busy, they tend to work pretty much on the task aspect and probably don't spend much time on the relationship aspect. In fact, I would estimate that probably it's a 90-10 split. So 90% of the work that you do is pretty much around the task and how you get this task or the product out the door, and maybe 10% on the relationship. Now, you might do a little bit of team building, for example, when you start the team, and often what happens is it's the relationship dimension that causes the problem in the team. True? So I'm sure you'd be aware of that. And so what happens is that when there are relationship breakdowns in the team, we tend to just down tools and we concentrate all our effort on the relationship aspect of the team. And of course, you know, time's taken up by that. But had we spent a little bit of time early on, it may well not have been a problem at the time when it was a problem. So I think what I'm going to concentrate on here in this presentation is the relationship dimension. It is true to say that if you show me any high-performing team, and of course I'm using the All Blacks as an exemplar of that in this book, but if you look at any high-performing team, regardless of where it is, one thing for sure is that they've got the relationship dimension worked out. Now, they've obviously got the task dimension worked out too, because if it's a sporting team, the task is obviously to win the game. So they've got that part worked out, but really, if you're looking for the secret sauce, it's really around relationship building. And my suggestion to you is if you put and exert a little bit more effort into that, you will be very surprised at how incredibly effective that can be. And of course, that will spill over to the relationship, that'll spill over to the tasks as well. So getting the relationship aspect right is critical to task performance. Now, the problem is it's a little bit complicated, because if you look at the needs that you have in the team, you've got a task. Obviously, you've got to get the task done. And what we mean by that is what you do. So that's obviously one part of it. But then when you look at the relationship dimension, you could break it up into 2 subsets. You've got the team. So obviously you want the team to be harmonious and working together. And then of course, there's the individual relationships. That is your relationship to each team member, and also each team member's relationship to each other. So that's where it gets a little complicated. Not only that, you've got the relationships between your team and your stakeholders, both within the organization and outside. So the relationship aspect is quite complex, and yet we only spend a small percentage of time working on those things. So hopefully I can enlighten you on how you might make a little bit more effort in doing a bit more effort in that, in terms of getting a good payback. So the individual is about the individual needs of each team member. And as you know, they're all different, and you've all got different quality relationships with each individual. And the team one is really around harmony. It's really about balance, and it's about, you know, collaboration. And that would probably, a lot of that would happen in your team meetings and so on. So it's certainly the bottom two things that I'm going to concentrate on in our session today. Now, here is the team identity model, which comes fresh out of my book. And let me just sort of spend a bit of time explaining this to you. And then I will spend a bit of time talking about these 8 characteristics. Now, you can see in the inner circle, there's 3 words: buffering, bridging, and building. Now, buffering, bridging, and building are strategies that you use as a team leader in order to build a good team harmony. Now, buffering is where you actually prevent outside influences from cannibalizing your team. So often, this can happen in a whole variety of different ways. People ask to attend meetings that aren't useful. People wanting resources from your team. They want to second team members. All sorts of influences from outside the team will try and distract and disrupt the team. And your job as a team leader is to try to buffer some of that. Now, it's not always easy. And of course, I'm not suggesting that you ignore everything from outside, because that wouldn't be effective. But certainly to some degree, you need to be a gatekeeper around those sorts of things. Now, bridging is the exact opposite. That's where you actually reach out to the stakeholders and the people that you need in order to get your job done within the team. So this is the counterbalance between buffering. So bridging is reaching out. And then the other one, which is building, is really around building a team, a cohesive team. This is really about the culture of the team. So a good team leader will actually concentrate on those 3 things. And then you'll notice around the outer circle, there are 8 characteristics, and each of them fall within those 3 functions: buffering, bridging, and building. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But just before I do that, perhaps it might be worthwhile just explaining what I think team identity is. So team identity, in my view, is the extent to which your team members identify with being part of the team. So, for example, if you're at a barbecue or something and someone asked you what you did, would you be inclined to tell them what your functional role was? Would you be inclined to tell them what team or what department or what section you're in the business? Or would you just simply mention the fact that you're part of this business? The extent to which a team member identifies with the team is important to some degree, because they need to feel a sense of identity to that team. Now, the stronger the team identity, the more its members connect with the team's ethos. So building this up is really important. Now, obviously you can go too far with this and become a little bit of a sort of an empire builder in your own right, and not be seen to be a team player within the organization as well. But to some degree, as a leader, your job is to build a team identity. So a compelling team identity, when you get it right, means that people will readily identify and associate with the team before the organization at large. So that's what it means. Now, let's go back to these 8 characteristics around the outside circle. Let's start, for example, let's start here with building trust. Now, I don't think any of you would deny the fact that trust is critically important in a team, but it's pretty elusive, isn't it? I mean, for example, it's very hard to get trust, but it's very easy to lose it. The other thing about trust that's interesting is it ebbs and flows. It can go up and down depending on what's going on in your team. So it's one of those characteristics of high-performing teams that we all acknowledge as part of a high-performing team, but it's one of those, it's elusive. It's something you've got to continually work at. So, for example, one of your team members might trust you implicitly and another one doesn't. So obviously that creates a problem in terms of trying to build that trust level up with that team member itself. So I think working hard at that. And if you said, what's one thing you could do, I would suggest just being authentic. So when you make a mistake, put your hand up, admit it, move on, apologize for those things, say it as it is. I mean, you know, I think often we try and sugarcoat some of our feedback to our team members. I think it's really important to be very open and honest with your team members. I think they appreciate that in the long run, even though they might not like it at the beginning when whatever it's mentioned, constructive criticism, whatever. The other thing, so that's one characteristic. Now, another characteristic is shared leadership. Now, not everything that you do in the team should be shared with the team. I'm not suggesting that. You've got to make unilateral decisions at times, and I think it's perfectly appropriate to do that. So, for example, when there's a deadline that you're up against and you have to make a quick call on it, that would be the right decision to do. But I'd also say to you that I think it's very important that you take your team with you at different times. Now, think about your team meetings. That's the place to do this. Now, if you have a team meeting, I suspect that the majority of that meeting is some sort of a reporting process where you go around the table, find out where people are at, and, you know, build upon that. Now, obviously, you need to do that. I'm not suggesting you get rid of that. But if that's all you do in a team meeting, it's problematic because it's just a series of reports and people are just tuning out. So what I suggest you do is just reduce the amount of time you spend on the reporting, just down to the fundamentals that are required. Don't increase the time in the meeting, but just reduce the amount of reporting, which will leave you a space to start putting problems on the table and having genuine discussions with team meetings and with your team, you know, genuine discussions about what can be done in the team. I think that's really important. So, look, a good place to start is to ask your team member 3 simple questions, and it really works well. If you had to describe the team as a color, what would it be and why? If you had to describe the team as an animal, what would it be and why? And if you had to describe our team as a motor vehicle, what would it be and why? Now, that's a very interesting exercise because you'll come up with all sorts of interesting labels. But the most important part of that is why. And you just listen to what people have got to say around the table. What you will find, interestingly enough, is that the themes will be very, very similar. Of course, the colours, animals and vehicles won't be, but certainly the themes will. Then you could perhaps ask your team, what would you like it to be if it could be that? And usually what that means is that there's a gap between where you see yourself or where the team sees themselves and where you want to go. So the question is, how do we go from A to B? Why not get the team involved in those sorts of discussions? The third characteristic there is being agile. So I know agility is a buzzword, it's the new black, but the truth of the matter is we all have to be agile because our environment is changing. We're living in a world of accelerated change and uncertainty. So your team has got to be flexible and agile enough to be able to adjust and change focus and position very quickly. And that can be enormously frustrating for you and your team because obviously you're always in a state of flux. But that's the new world that we live in. And I think teams have got to start working at that. And all high-performing teams that I know are very good at being able to change direction very quickly, which is essentially the definition of agility. So if you can build high levels of trust, if you can share the leadership at the appropriate time, and if you can be agile and constantly changing, you are in effect buffering your team from outside influences. So you can see that those 3 in the yellow are very much around the buffering. Now, obviously, in the book, I go into great detail about how you can do those things. Now, if we move around the circle clockwise and we go to the bridging function of teams, the very first thing that a team needs is a very clear purpose statement. I often think that teams indulge in what I might refer to as fake work. Fake work means work that perhaps doesn't lead to the strategic direction. It's maybe attending mindless meetings and so forth and so on. So a good idea is to actually see if you can establish in one sentence a team identity statement. And I would do this again with the team so that the team own that statement. And in the book, I go into great detail about how to do that. Managing stakeholders is very, very important because quite frankly, you can't actually be effective as a team unless you've got the cooperation of the key stakeholders within and outside the organization. So stakeholder management is very, very important. And one of the things you can do there is a stakeholder map. Who are your stakeholders and what can you do to improve your working relationships with those stakeholders will make a huge difference, obviously. So moving around the circle, we now get to building, and this is more of an internal function. So with the building function, we're looking at three things in particular. Improving systems. Now, again, where do we find the time to do that? But yet it's so important. And not normally what happens is the only time we improve systems is when things go wrong. But I think that using tools like the after action review at the end of a project is an extremely important way of being able to evaluate how the team's performed and what can be done differently next time. What can we do perhaps that will make a bigger difference? Now, utilising diversity, and I'm aware that the team that you've got, you may well have inherited, but there's not much you can do in terms of issues such as gender and ethnicity. But when I talk about diversity in my book, I'm talking about diversity of thinking styles. Everyone in your team comes to the table looking at things differently. And if you can harness that, you're going to make a huge difference in terms of the quality of conversation and the input that you're going to get around collective decision making. There are lots of tools out there, such as the team management profile, which can help you do that. And I think it's a very helpful exercise to do. Now, the final one there on the list, of course, is learning continuously. Show me any high-performing team anywhere in the world, and they're always in a state of learning. They're always trying to be better. They're always trying to be faster. They're always trying to be safer. They're always trying to do things by minimizing costs. And this is a mindset more than anything else, and getting your team into that sort of thinking. I often hear people say all the time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that statement, whilst we might latch onto it, in our workplace, the truth is it's automatically blocked off any potential of looking at a new and better and faster way of doing something. So we need to think carefully about how we do that and create this mindset of continuously learning. And by doing that, by continuously learning and by utilizing diversity and improving systems, you are building. And that is, of course, the third function of team identity. So you might say, well, goodness me, where do I start? I've got all these 8 things, and I acknowledge that what you're saying is true. But what I'd suggest you do is you just pick one of those. You pick one of those characteristics on the outer circle. And what you do is you work very hard at trying to build that and improve that. And because you do that, what will happen is it'll impact on other characteristics in the team. That's the good news. The good news is you work on one, it'll impact on several. The bad news is if one is lacking around that circle, it's likely to impact on the other characteristics as well. So I think that even though I've split them up into different categories, the truth is that they're all interdependent, if you like. So they all work together. I don't doubt that there are other characteristics of high-performing teams, but basically I would say that these are the 8 that are critically important to team success. So I just wanted to let you know that, next week, and of course I have one of these every Friday, every single Friday until the end of the year, a 30-minute look at teams and some of my other books as well. But next week on Friday at 2 p.m, I have another webinar which is called Eliminating Fake Work, Creating a Shared Purpose in Your Team. So I'm going to delve a little deeper into this shared purpose. You are most welcome to attend. And when I send you the slides, all you've got to do is to click on that link that you've got there in front of you. And by doing that, of course, you're registered for next Friday. And I would, I'd welcome you to do that. So that's what's happening next Friday. Just one other thing before I wrap up today. My book, as I said, is out, and I've got a special offer for you. Now, if you went through the conventional channels, you'd pay $35 with postage to get this book, which is not an unreasonable price, of course. But I'm willing to give you the book and post you the book. My price today is $25, which is inclusive of postage. So all you have to do to take advantage of that is send me an email right now, or at least before the close of business today, and I will work out, I'll send you an invoice, and I'll also send you a copy of my book, which I've got plenty of copies here waiting for a home, and I'll send them out. I'll send it out to you. I'll sign it for you, not a problem, and I'll send it to you, and you'll get it in a few days. So that's my offer to you. So take advantage of that, but don't forget, it's not going to last, and you need to get that back to me by the close of business today. All right, so I'll just stop sharing my screen. So thank you, folks. I've enjoyed spending time with you in our short 30 minutes. Hopefully you can join me next Friday for eliminating fake work and looking at that one of those characteristics, which of course is shared purpose. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you today. If you want to get a copy of the book, and or see you next week for our topic on shared purpose. Thanks everyone, and all the very best. Thank you and goodbye.